If you enjoy the story, give it a like and feel free to leave a comment. Also, be sure to subscribe and click the bell icon to be the first to hear new cryptid tales. I'm always looking for stories to share, so if you've had your own encounter with the unknown, send me an email at cryptidtalesmail@gmail.com.
I have a couple stories I'd like to share about Sasquatch. I live in a small coastal village in Alaska on the Kenai Peninsula. Most of the people from here originally came from the infamous Port Chatham or Portlock, so Sasquatch are known around here as the Nantiinaq. It's a very big part of our culture and our lives, and is very common for people to witness things. Ever since I was very young, I've heard stories from elders and community members of the things. It was early May when I was 17. The snow had finally began melting, so black bears had began coming out, and all the freezers were running low. Our freezer was running low on meat, so my cousin and I decided to head out towards a nearby bay, approximately 11 miles away by a four-wheeler, because more black bear had been harvested there than anywhere else in the area. We loaded up and glassed around for a couple hours. We didn't see nothing, so we moved on. Again, we did not see anything, so we decided to head back home. As we were getting closer to home, we saw on a mountain a black spot we thought was a bear. We stopped and watched it for a while. It was probably the largest black bear I had ever seen. I pulled out my .30-06 and I decided I was going to try to shoot it. It was about 600 yards, not a shot I was comfortable taking, but it was starting to get dark, so we didn't have much of a choice. I took the shot. Boom. I missed. I tried to get a little bit closer because the bear seemed to not be fazed at all. I began moving closer, but the alders were so thick it was hard to get in there. My cousin said, "I'll clear a trail so it'll be easier to come back out and you go try to get closer." I told him okay and to be careful, and I moved forward. It opened up a bit, about 100 yards into the brush. I saw the bear, but it wasn't clear enough to take a shot. I kept moving onward and began hearing strange noises around me. It sounded like animals shuffling around me, but it was so thick no animals would be able to run that fast. But I clearly heard the leaves crunching around me. I just brushed it off thinking that the birds were going crazy. Finally, I got to the bottom of the mountain. It opened up, but I could no longer see the bear, just the area it was in. I decided to climb up the mountain further and try to sneak up on it, even though the berry bushes were to my chest. I couldn't see when I got in them, but I kept going farther and farther. About halfway up the mountain, I heard in front of me shuffling and branches cracking and crunching, coming towards me. I loaded a shell and was thinking the black bear was about to walk right into me, and I can't even see it. Just a second later, I heard the same thing behind me. I began going up the mountain, faster now, trying to get to a clearing. Finally, I had reached the clearing and decided to just rest for a couple minutes. I sat down, and just as I sat down, I was looking down the mountain and saw my cousin run out of the brush, screaming my name, looking more scared than I had ever seen him. He's normally a pretty quiet person. I took my hoodie off and picked up a stick and started waving it so he could see me. He had begun climbing up the mountain. It took him a few minutes to reach me, and by the time he got to me, he was shaking. He said he couldn't stay down there any longer. I asked why, and he told me he had heard shuffling in the brush all around him. That sent chills down my spine, because I had heard the same thing. I tried to remain calm. We began climbing down the mountain, and we were losing daylight. We got to the bottom and began moving out of the area. I told him the trail was to the right, but he insisted it was to the left. We both just wanted out of there, so we just took off in different directions. It wasn't long before I couldn't hear him around me anymore. I had heard the noises again, more aggressively now, so I yelled for him. He yelled back from about 100 yards away and said he was on the road. I ran to his voice, and we loaded up all of our gear on the four-wheeler and began driving home, not saying a single word to each other. We finally made it home and told our parents. They were very worried about us and told us about the Nantiinaq, or Bigfoot, and the little people up on the mountain. People had heard and seen them before. I went to bed, but it took me forever to finally fall asleep. I'm a very light sleeper, and it doesn't take much to wake me. I woke up to the sound of 3 knocks at my window. I looked at my alarm clock. The time was 2:55 a.m., and the knocking sounds continued a couple more times. I brushed it off, not thinking much of it. The next day went on, and just like before, I went to sleep and had cracked my window open very slightly. I woke to noise of my window being opened slowly. I jumped up out of bed and slammed it shut. I looked out and saw nothing. I went to lay back down and looked at the time. It was 2:55 a.m., just like the night before, and just as before, I heard 3 knocks on my window. I looked again, but still, there was nothing there. I laid down and eventually fell asleep. This went on for another 5 days, getting more and more aggressive every night at the same time, but the last night was the loudest and craziest of all. It was just as before I had gone to sleep, and at 2:55, I just woke up to hear my window being pounded on to the point it sounded like it was going to break. I jumped up and reached for my rifle. I was tired of it. I ran outside with a flashlight and looked where the knocking had been coming from, but there was nothing there at all. I searched all outside and did a full sweep of the house, but found nothing. That's when it dawned on me. I ran into my house and grabbed a measuring tape and went to below my window outside. I measured from the ground to the bottom of my window. It was 13.5 feet tall, and there were no trees that could reach that window. I just went back in and laid down and barely got any sleep the rest of the night. Finally, a couple of weeks later, I had told this story to my parents, and I couldn't even talk about it without shaking. They asked why I waited so long to tell them. The truth was, I was too scared that they wouldn't believe me. When I'd tell people outside of the village I live in, they'd laugh at me and mock me. They even called me crazy. I had gotten scared to share my story because I felt foolish and thought to myself, maybe I'm just crazy. Until I heard others share their stories on this channel. It got me excited to tell my stories to people with an open mind.